Hello, hello, and welcome to the Explain It podcast. I am your host, Ingryd Hernandez. Super excited about today's episode. We have somebody who really has helped me out a lot in the last, call it 4 or 5 months, as I transitioned out of my previous property management team into his property management organization. And that's going to happen, guys. When you're a real estate investor, you have to constantly being reviewing your assets. Are they generating the income you were expecting? Are people performing in the way that they were supposed to perform? And after that evaluation, if the things are not lining up, then you might have to make some tough decisions. But one of the things that's super exciting about my next guest is that it's not just all about getting work done, but also creating a balance. Like the whole reason we got into being entrepreneurs and owning our own businesses was for freedom and for a lifestyle that met our needs. And so I'm excited to talk about how Tyler has incorporated that into his life, him and his wife. But secondly, I do have a little bit of housekeeping. One is if you are a Spanish-speaking investor, we do have a new group in Facebook called Latinos Sin Límites, and we will be predominantly speaking in Spanish. So if you or anybody you know who wants to be in an environment where you're primarily talking in Spanish and you need that language in order for you to kind of better learn what you need, let me know. DM me on Instagram. I'll send you the Facebook group or DM me on Facebook and I will send you the group link. And then secondly, just a reminder that I am a co-founder of creativelisting.com. So make sure that you guys are leveraging creativelisting.com as a way for you to look for properties that are available through creative means. But without further ado, Mr. Tyler Burke.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. And we've gotten to know each other because you've done such a fantastic job for some of my friends who are also in this investor world. And so it's kind of unique because most of the folks that I've gotten business with, I actually met them myself, but you actually referred to me by 3 or 4 different people, which was really cool. So tell me a little bit about your origin story and how and what you're doing in the real estate realm.
Yeah, I've been in real estate now since 2022, 2021, 2022, where my wife and I did the classic know nothing and drink through a fire hose method of purchasing a property and DIYing it ourselves and trying to fix it up. And we learned a lot in our early stages, which then kind of progressed into turning that into an Airbnb, which then progressed into obviously needing to manage it and figuring that portion out. So currently we operate one of our own personal Airbnbs. And then my wife and I created the Kingdom Cribs business. So we do property management for short-term, mid-term, soon to be long-term as well. And then we also do interior decor. So my wife kind of does the white glove service from when somebody signs the paper to putting the house together in many different forms or fashions. Again, it's very different if it's a short-term rental versus a co-living property, but she can do it all and then get the photos done, get it all cleaned up, put it in my lap, and then I take it from there. So, in the short 4 years of real estate, we've learned a lot and, progressed to that point.
That's so awesome. And I'm sure through those 4 years, there's been a lot of ups and downs, or has it just all been gravy?
No, it's a roller coaster. Anybody who says it's not is not telling the truth.
Totally. Absolutely. What are some of one of the things that you wrote as part of hey, what are we going to talk about today was balance, finding balance between what you have going on and having the time freedom, I presume, of being with your family. What are some of the things that you've learned in the 4 years that you were doing it? And was there anything that was happening that you're like, wait a minute, why did I get into this? The whole point of doing this was to create more freedom. Did you have that kind of moment?
I think that they're ongoing, and I have not gotten to a point where those days have not completely gone away. I think that's the nature of just scaling anything in general. What I think a lot of people overlook in the beginning is the mental side of business, right? And
Mhm.
I think it's critically important. That's what I always share with people first when they're like, I want to start a business. I want to work hard. I'm like, you're going to work hard, but there's going to be a lot that goes wrong. And any game that you play is 90 to 95% mental. The doing is not hard. It's the, taking care of the fires you have to put out, which can either burn you out or, you can learn to keep going. So, a big part of it, especially with our brand and something that is a foundation for us is we're a faith-based business. So it's big for us where we root our, I think, daily activities, our daily identity. We know who we are outside of the business, and then also learning how to mentally handle some of those things, I think has taken us a long way to when those days are hard, we don't give up, but also understanding every time you scale, there will be a new level of people you need to bring in, different resources, different partnerships. So I think it's just an ongoing revolution of just like a revolving wheel of, you feel like you get everything solved and then you feel like you're kind of back at square one. In all reality, you're just 10 steps ahead, hitting another plateau that you have to overcome. So.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And it's funny because I still remember going to a mastermind that I paid $12,000 to be at a mastermind for 3 days. Okay, so just to give everybody context, and sitting there thinking like, okay, when I started learning how to become an investor, my ultimate goal was to own real estate, right? And
Mhm.
now I've grown my portfolio between here, Ohio, and West Virginia. It's like over 22 houses. And it's like, wow, like I don't sit there and think about it. But I still remember when I first was trying to figure things out that I was like, oh, I would really love to own real estate, and had at the moment really had one that I purchased with my family. And it was something we had to do to help my mom kind of get out of a financial situation. But that like it was kind of like something that landed. It wasn't planned, right? Like it
Mhm.
was put on our lap. But other than that, I was like, well, how do I do this more intentionally? And still remembering writing down in the next year, I'm going to buy 3 properties. And I ended up buying 4, like that I kept. And really, I should have gotten going a lot sooner. I probably would have had double that by the time I was writing that down. But what I didn't think about is like, okay, now I own all these properties. Oh my gosh, the amount of bills that come from those properties that you have to like administer to, right?
Mhm.
Like, okay, was the internet paid? Like, especially if any of them are short term rentals, as an example, and a few of them were for me, and all the asset management that I never really thought about. I
Mhm.
was more worried about buying a property and having tenants in place. I wasn't thinking truly beyond that. Did you have any kind of moment like that too? You're like, oh, dude, there's like all this stuff that I have to also worry about.
Yeah, yeah. I think for our personal portfolio, like I said, I'm at a crossroads right now where we have a lot of equity in the only property we own. And it's unique. Usually in real estate, you hear a lot about just partnership, partnership, partnership. And we have 100% in our first home, which I think is a wonderful kickstart and a huge blessing to where, my wife and I just, again, put a lot of money in. And we just said, we know a lot of people in many different areas, and, we hope to grow from that. So we have equity. I'm looking to kind of pick my avenue that I really want to focus on for the personal portfolio.
Mhm.
So I guess in regards to admin, bills, things of that sort, it's much easier on the personal portfolio side. On the property management portfolio side, we manage now, gosh, going on 70 doors, 80 doors. And it's very important. And what I always tell people is if you are not organized, you have to just go above and beyond early on with everything that needs to get taken care of. You take care of it early because you don't want to continuously run into, again, the problems we talked about 5 minutes ago. The more well organized and just cutting out everything that's a necessity right at the beginning, getting all the proper teams, your boots on ground, and then automating as many processes as you can, that will really help in regards to that. So, there are some properties that I'll cover bills for. There are some that I don't, but just making sure that you're very well organized. You have either systems or manual processes that you just stick to and ensure that those are covered. That's where you can kind of avoid some of those mistakes. But for anybody just wanting to hop in and then you don't even have a Google Doc or Google Sheet or anything set up or even pen and paper, then you just think you're going to shoot from the hip, it's probably not going to work out too well for you.
Totally. Yeah. It can be burdensome to not be organized in this business. And obviously you're managing other people's some of their largest assets they'll ever own. What is your most ideal client who has that, who has the need for you? What is your most ideal client?
Again, I think it's been a blessing, especially meeting the community that you're a part of and some other individuals. There's I would say two ways for me to answer this. I think there is the benefit of having clients, for instance, investors such as yourself who like to move fast. You all like to get into deals. I don't care if it's just me or if it's 10 of us. This house is going to make money. Let's get in. So really being able to partner with individuals who know how to move quick. Obviously, in real estate, the quicker you move, the more everybody grows. So that's a blessing. And then if it's more on the, I would say, short-term rental side, there have been a lot of success stories for individuals who are I need to buy a property for my tax write-offs type of individuals, right? So these are individuals who just are looking for the tax write-off, but are also, hey, I don't have time for this. And then they can rely on my wife and I to take that, very large workload of right after you sign the paper, my wife will do everything from there, fly out to the property, put it all together. So individuals who really just need that full white glove service are also fun individuals to work with. So, those are few and far between. So it's kind of that balance of understanding, where I need to put my focus. And if we're looking to grow as a property management business and interior decor business, having one deal every year or two is a little bit different than 2 to 3, maybe 4 partnerships a month because of speed. So,
yeah. So you said you're already at like 70 to 80 doors. That does not necessarily mean properties, right?
Correct. Yeah. Some of those are co-livings, which, could be 6 to 10 doors. So there's about 3 to 4 of those. And then I want to say in regards to the doors, probably 20 to 25 on Airbnb that are all separate properties.
Yeah.
So about 25.
That's so many people to work with.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What are some of the things that you've learned through that process that you're like, this is definitely something I know you talked about being organized, but there is got to be something about personalities, right? Like I have to believe like my personality is way different than, I don't know, Kyle Cargis. I know that it's one of your partners, right? So just curious, like what have you learned through having to deal with, especially those of us? I think it's funny. Somebody's name is Snow the Squirrel. I'm like, those of us who are squirrely, I'm squirrely, right? There's one thing and then the other. So just curious what you learned.
I think it's a big factor, which works in every aspect of life, especially marriage, is communication and really being able to understand upfront expectations. Sometimes partnerships come from harder spots, right? Like I need to make a transition. Sometimes other ones are starting fresh, right? And you're just into the industry and you get to partner. So I think just not being naive of your surroundings and understanding what really is going on, right? And that's how I think then I adapted the property management business into understanding how I need to charge, because I understand, giving a stronger cushion in the first 90 days is cash back in your pocket, which creates more of a less of a risk, right, in real estate. And anytime you can create less of a risk and communicate that. I think that really helps. But yeah, I think really just communication, understanding people's personalities, understanding that, hey, we can talk it out. And if we have a bad day, let's hop on the phone and let's chat through it. Let's not just play this ghost each other game where somebody gets mad at somebody and then it just creates separation. I'd much rather figure things out, again, like I said, and figure it out very early on. Hey, what are your expectations with this property? How do you operate when something breaks? How hard are you to get a hold of? Right. And I think you can learn those things really quick. Because speed matters, especially property management. That's one of the top skill sets, is two skill sets. One, I just mentioned, communication and speed. So if you can just do things quick, you can solve a lot of problems.
Amen, brother.
So.
I listened to Cody Sanchez, and she's like, speed is actually your competitive advantage.
Yep.
Because so many folks move at a much slower speed, but if you can make a decision quicker than anybody else and move on something much faster, that actually will be a competitive advantage. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and a lot of the times it's kind of putting your pride to the side and understanding, hey, I'm building a business, and I may not want to do this in this moment, or I may want to try and bring somebody else in, but I can't get a hold of anybody that would normally do this for me. For instance, one of your properties, there was a tenant dispute within the property, and multiple at one time. And so I just messaged everybody. I said, hey, and I think I gave the 48-hour window. I said, in 48 hours, I'll be at the property. Let's have a house meeting. Let's all sit out back or sit at the kitchen table. Anybody who'd like to join, let's talk. Right. So just acting quick, trying to save tenants, save relationships there, save, again, the communication and tenants knowing that, hey, somebody cares and somebody's willing to show up. I think that's really important. Again, it's not something that I'll do 10 out of 10 times, but if it's something that I know can help you in the first 4, 5, 6 months of our partnership, get a gross revenue of 2x than you would have prior, I'm willing to do that, right? Because if I can prove that strength for you in the first short window, I think that's what creates longevity in terms of, outside of the tenant relationship, just the owner and property manager partnership. I think that can strengthen that.
Yeah. Well, co-living is all the rage now.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like it's definitely the direction that investors are, I would argue, are having to take, not necessarily that that's where they started and that's what they wanted. But because, especially in Arizona, and I'm speaking specifically to Arizona, creating an opportunity for a long-term rental to make sense has been extremely difficult. Mm-hmm. And so in order for us to move forward with houses, some of them have had to now be converted to co-living. What are some of the fundamentals, since you manage them, that you believe are important for investors to understand about co-living that they may not learn by just doing the underwriting piece?
I think obviously the biggest part that a lot of people overlook, they look at the number and they look at what each room can rent for. And you get so stuck and your eyes just get big and look right at the paper. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's so much money. But you forget that you are now going to be dealing with 8 individuals who are bumping shoulders throughout the entire day. So something I always recommend to people is, not to scare anyone away from it, because again, it is a great investment style. It's just either strap on your boots really tight and be ready for a lot of problems that you're going to have to deal with in regards to somebody has a dog, or somebody's not cleaning the toilet, or somebody's leaving dishes in the sink, or, and sometimes you feel like you're just kind of playing on-site house manager for them rather than it just being, kind of get the lease signed, hey, let me know if the AC goes out. It's a lot more ongoing communication and ongoing managing. So I always tell people that, hey, if this is just something you want to talk to me about and get some tips and tricks, just be ready, strap your boots on and be ready for a ride. If you're willing to pay a smaller fee and, offload that, we're here for you. Right. So you always have options, but I think that's the biggest thing, is just understanding that you are putting, 6 to 10 individuals of completely different lifestyles, completely different. You name every protected class that there is out there, right, with fair housing, and you put them all together, and you really have to make sure that you have strong rules, and you stick to them, because if you bend anywhere, it will break.
1,000%. Yeah. And I think people do forget that. They look at the math, they get excited, and they're like,
Mhm.
okay, we're moving forward. And I try not to read all the messages, but I can't help myself. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't. And it's so crazy, right? Because when you become an investor, part of something that you have to protect is your mindset.
Mhm.
And then when you're reading some of the things that folks are just complaining about or not getting along around, you're like, this is what you do with your life? So crazy.
Mhm.
So it's interesting to kind of bring things back as an investor and be like, oh yeah, that's right. Some people cannot get beyond problems like these, and that's why becoming an investor is so important, to really think about your mindset and yeah, protect it. Like, make sure
Mhm.
that is something you really must make sure is free from all of this. All to say is, this is why you want property management with
Yeah.
co-living. And for
Yeah.
me, like, I self-manage some of my long-term rentals because they're super easy.
Mhm.
Like, long-term rentals for me, is just, to your point, if you set expectations up front, your lease clearly indicates who has what responsibility when something happens, and you keep all the notices that you're required, then it's like way easier to manage. Whereas short-term rental and long-term rental, or excuse me, short-term rentals and co-living have so much activity around it, and a lot of other services too, that I couldn't deal with that as an investor. I've got to protect, like, my mindset. I got to protect, like, what I need to work on.
Mhm.
So what's some advice that you have for, I mean, I mean, you're a property manager. You're gonna be
Yeah.
like, just hire you.
No, no, no. Yeah, I definitely can speak to that. I think number one, I think a great book that everybody should read. I'm big on learning through books, but also I think experience, right, beats everything. But I think books open up your mind to understanding where you can focus that experience, right? One of
Mhm.
them is Emotional Intelligence 2.0. It's a great book that teaches you emotion is real, right? Don't sit there and say, oh, no, I'm just not going to feel this. No, feel it, but also understand that your brain takes on the chemical flow to emotion first, then logic second, right? So this book really helps you harness learning that when somebody sends a message and you feel like the world is falling apart, understand, okay, cool, this is valid. Somebody's going through something and somebody has a different emotional mindset than I do. But then I get to understand, okay, let me sit here, let me not act and respond on emotion. Let it get to the logic part of my brain, and let me start to really focus on what are things I can do to fix this situation. Is this something that I am required to go out to the property, or can I, disperse this to somebody on the team that I trust that could get there, so I think that book really helps. But yeah, like you said, there's always the delegating tasks to individuals. Again, if it's to a property management team, wonderful. If it's not, and you still want to manage the property, I would always encourage very early on, when you're doing the organizational stages of putting things together, making sure you have individuals that you can delegate this kind of work to. Because, like you
Mhm.
said, you need to protect your time as an investor. And instead of maybe taking 2 or 3 visits to homes that have good, revenue spreads on them, you're over here putting out fires instead, and you're not growing your portfolio, you're taking care of the problem. So
Mhm.
learning how to make cleaners also be your handyman, and also, cleaners being maybe your boots on the ground, to where if they're in, hey, if you guys are going to be in the area from now until the next clean, can you please just stop in and, check on this? So really being able to delegate to teams that you trust, building those, again, outside of owner property manager, but partnerships with third party vendors, to where you can really lean on people to be that same individual that you would be, but just saving, protecting your time as well. I have to do that just the same that you do, to where I can't drive to all these different doors and fix all these different things or deal with all these different tenants. Some of the time it will be, hey, I know there's an issue at this house and cleaners are planning on being there in 2 days. Let me message them and see if they can get there a little earlier and start their clean earlier, and really just kind of delegating some of those tasks.
Yeah. As an investor, what are some questions that we should have ready to go in asking property managers that we're vetting and really starting to differentiate, like, who are the property managers we actually want to work with and who are the ones that like will really help you grow your business and have a good experience with your, whether it's your tenants, your guests, whatever it may qualify as?
Yeah. I think price is always important, right? You need to make sure that your nets are going to be okay. And so I think having the pricing talk is always critical. It's never going to be the end all be all. I firmly believe that our property management is worth much more than we charge, but I also understand that growth and acquisitions in terms of working with more people comes with a price as well. So, talking on that, I would always ask property managers how they plan to be transparent with you. What are your like income statements and charge statements going to be? Are you willing to let me be on the listing, right? Anytime that somebody tries to start boxing you out and hiding things, that's where there will be problems. For instance, one of the things that we do is we always invite the owner to be on the listing. Like you said, you look at some of the messages some days. I want you to see how fast we are responding. I want you to see how we are treating your tenants, right? I don't want to hide that. I want you to have that visibility, which continues to build trust, right? Instead of you having to sit there for 5, 6, 7 days being like, what's Tyler doing over there? So I think transparency is a big topic to touch on. And then I had one more for you, but I'm going to space on it. Yeah. Cost, transparency, and then, and then like I said earlier, the speed and the communication, right? So just have a handful of questions. If X happens, how are you going to respond? Here, give me Y. So ask the X and then tell the property manager to give you Y. What's your process behind solving this problem? And if you can feel that really early, if they start to say, oh, we have a team for that. Oh, we have a this for that. Instead of giving you the direct answer, if the door lock is dead and you don't have a lockbox with a key in it, how are you going to let someone get it? Or how are you going to get someone in the house? Right. So if somebody can't give you direct answers on how they will solve that problem, that can be somewhat of a yellow flag for you.
Yeah, for sure. There's other things that I also feel that with technology getting better, and it's totally okay if you guys aren't doing this, by the way, because I recognize that like property management is such a word of mouth business. Would you agree with that? Yeah. But what I've also identified, at least this was with my previous property managers, is that they don't have a solid marketing plan for properties that you have available for renting out, right? Especially short-term rental. Reality is that your short-term rentals will do better if you're also able to rent them out off of the platforms like your typical Airbnb, VRBO. Would you say it's also important to know what the marketing plan is with your property managers, especially if you have those types of needs?
Yeah, I think so. Understanding that, the more it can be seen. So that's a concept of marketing. I'm not a marketing professional, but that's a piece of marketing that I know. Even if it's just out there and being seen, it may not mean that you're going to get bookings, but it's just being seen, right? So having somebody that's willing to list in multiple places, having a personal website up, getting in the Facebook groups and just weekly dropping it into Facebook groups and, hey, have this window open. Anybody that knows anyone looking for a house. So there's so many different ways. And I think it just comes down to the action of doing, that some property managers don't do, because they're so busy putting out fires and they haven't learned how to delegate. And then there are some that do it. Again, it may not ever result in a booking, but if you're consistently in a Facebook group, it keeps eyes on your house, eyes on you, eyes on the owner, which, just creates communication. And then eventually someone says, oh yeah, 3 months down the road, I saw that one Facebook post of this cool house in Surprise. And then they end up saying, oh, that was the one. It's you found it on Airbnb. So I think just being consistent with ensuring that the properties are out there and people are seeing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that was one of the frustrations for me, is that, like, the reality is Airbnb and VRBO, they've gotten super competitive. Some markets are very saturated. So you kind of have to do those extra marketing steps so that folks can, see you first as a business, right? Kingdom Cribs, like, hey, you're branding yourself. But why go through the effort of having such a great website where it has all these houses that you're overseeing and not get it out there where folks can actually look over your inventory and see what's available? That's the point. The point is to be able to socialize and create a marketing opportunity for these properties. So yeah, I definitely think that is an important question to ask when you're an investor dealing with property management. And then the others are, I think you somewhat covered it too, which is do you have the resources for when things happen, or what happens if it happens overnight? Who's going to be responsible, and do you have a process for that? Right. Yeah,
that's important and very important information. Every property, a lot of cities are cracking down on ensuring that you have a 24, you almost have to set that up right at the beginning now, because I think they ran into so many of those problems where the 24-hour contact wasn't available, and there's gas leaks in houses and they can't get a hold of anybody. So really ensuring that you do have somebody that can answer the phone is critically important.
Yeah, for sure. Interesting. And then as far as property management is concerned, I feel like this is going to be a question that I will have to ask every single time somebody comes on to the podcast going forward. With AI being such a critical tool that people are starting to leverage, how do you see yourself? If I'm not sure if you've made plans for using AI, or if you've already started using AI and I just don't know any better, but do you see yourself using AI to be a stronger property management company? And then how do you see incorporating it, even if you haven't done it yet?
Yeah, AI so far I do for generic messaging, as well as, again, some marketing tactics. So I use that for kind of more operationally. But in regards to property management, it's hard. I think it's just the hospitality business. A lot of people want to know they're not talking to a robot, right? If you're talking to a support line, you want to know that it's not a robot. Or if you're dealing with a problem, you want to be talking to someone who has feelings, And so I think in regards to property management, the industry itself, can we use it operationally? Of course. And do we use it? Yes. But also making sure that there's a balance there. I think that's extremely critical, because if you go too robotic and too AI, people can kind of see through that smoke and then understand, this whole time I've been talking to a robot, or may feel tricked. I know some individuals who use it at a very high scale, where they use AI from marketing to end of reservation, right? Some individuals that I know that run some boutique hotels, and they have somebody who's texting them throughout their entire stay, asking them how they're doing. And there's a company behind it that really has for years now put together communication fabrics on how you can cater to somebody throughout an entire stay and make it feel as human as possible. So I know it's possible. I know AI's capabilities, but again, I think somebody feeling the heart behind something and then even showing up at the door, that's another thing. Is if something's going to a point where you need to save a review and you can show up at the door. That's something that AI can't. So there still is a very strong need for that human component while also utilizing it operationally.
Yeah. Yeah. How important are reviews?
They are the lifeblood. I tell and that's an early question I ask every owner. How open are you to refunds, to saving reviews, right?
Mhm.
Because everybody knows one sour Google review for a restaurant can ruin it. Like someone can see one review and say, yeah, we're not going there. They wanted to go for the steak and somebody said the steak was awful in a review and give a 1 star, and that turns away business, right? That could be one person a day or 10 people a day that see that review. On these platforms, you get marketed if you are a guest favorite property, right? Or, excuse me. So, if it gets to a point where somebody's searching on a platform, call it Airbnb, and they don't finalize their booking, you always get the email and the notification from the app that says, come back and see what you're missing for your trip to Phoenix. And then you click on it, and what that does is your guest favorite property pops up in that email. So you get free marketing, right? So these are also other tactics that a lot of people don't understand, which is if you're using the right property managers with the right super host status that can get your property to be a guest favorite, that's also a very strong yet free marketing tactic that you can utilize. That anybody that searches Phoenix, if you're guest favorite, you'll come up in the list of, come back to this town, and then your house is right there in that email. So reviews are extremely critical, and it is very well worth giving up a couple $100 to save a review rather than, take the opportunity at losing thousands and thousands of eyes because you wanted to keep $100, right? So reviews are critically important.
Yeah. Yeah. And that definitely became clear having a property of mine up in Sedona and seeing that it didn't seem like we were on the same page about what those reviews need to look like. There is a reality too that like when you have a property in an area like Sedona, unless you have like boots on the ground, it can get really tough and expensive, right? But yeah, there's a specific experience that folks who are staying in areas like Sedona that they're expecting it no matter what. And so it's been an interesting experience to maybe not be on the same page with my previous property management team about like what should be expected of a customer experience. So anyway, I'm glad you and I are kind of on the same page there too, where it's like, hey, our goal is to delight our customers because that's going to help us in the long run. Yeah.
Yep. And you can't forget the foundation of real estate, right? You get into it knowing you are in hospitality. As much as you like it or not at the beginning, I think truly understanding that I'm going to be investing in all of these different properties. Again, there are few and far between where you're just flipping, and you don't really deal with tenants or customers or the hospitality business. You're more just getting it ready for the next owner, which could be an individual you have to cater to. But I think really ensuring that you have a heart for people is critical at the beginning because it's going to help in the long run, very much so. So,
yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about how were you attracted to doing the property management? Like what is your goal here in 2026, having so many doors already? Like, give me a little flavor of what that looks like.
Yeah. I tried to get out of property management at the beginning, which resulted in me at the time meeting with, he was an acquaintance at the time, now has become very close friend, went to his bachelor party, Cody Barton. So I met with him one day. I just said, hey dude, I want to learn a little bit more about what you're doing, and figure out if we can partner together on something. And we went to lunch and he told me we need property management. And about 2 days before that, I was trying to get rid of our house to give it to one of my friends. So on the spot, when, an opportunity presents itself, you just jump on it and you figure it out. And so that's what I did, which kind of grew the property management from something that I was trying to get rid of to now I have a passion for. And I think for this year, interestingly enough, with how many doors that I have, I also have a full-time day job, sales job. So I have a lot on the plate. And again, I think it comes with making sure you navigate and set things up and organize very well. But I think my biggest goal really is to scale at a very fast pace in the co-living space this year.
Mm-hmm.
And, as well as short term, I'll always say that, that's a great industry still in my eyes. I know everybody has their opinion, but something that can still work for people if it's set up the right way and done the right way. But really scaling to a point where day job is gone. I probably could up to this point, but to where I just have no doubt in my mind, that's just going all in on the property management. And then the goal is down the road to sell the property management business, retire early. And as everybody says, you do these things to not work the rest of your life. So the goal is to create a solid property management business that not in 2026, but, much further down the road, be able to sell it and then use a lot of that cash to invest into properties that will just pay the rest of my life.
Yeah, I actually love that you already started with the end in mind. A lot of folks who get into business, they actually don't start that way. They're just like focusing on like, what's the next step, right? The next step is, okay, running a business, making it cash flow and being able to make that work. And then not realizing, hey, you need to set up your business for an exit. And even that will require different accounting. I had the pleasure of starting to learn a little bit more about that as we, I was a co-founder of creativelisting.com, and that from the get-go, we're like, what is our goal? What is our objective with this business? And if you're doing an exit, you need to believe, if I recall now, because I may not remember everything, but like be on accrual base, where if you're not necessarily doing that, then you're more on a cash base, and your accounting will dictate how quickly and how worthy you can prove your business to be if you have like a shorter time frame of an exit. So for example, if you're going to try to exit your business, you'll want to make sure you're not taking that much as an owner, because you want it to look lucrative and prove to be lucrative, and not worry too much about ad backs. When you have that many ad backs as a business, that actually, red flags go up with buyers to see, okay, is this a true multiple, or do I need to worry about bringing another employee to replace maybe the over delivery of that owner? And so sometimes we don't think about that. We're just like, I want to just go buy a cash flowing business. And that's something that's super important as you're looking to say, okay, I'm building this business for an exit. What does the accounting need to look like so that it's easy for me to do that 3 to 5 years from now? Right.
Yeah. Having the end goal and then reverse engineering. A lot of people try to just engineer forward, but doing it backwards is the way to do it. It's very confusing to a lot of people and, just out of the ordinary, but understanding where you're trying to go and then breaking it all the way back down to today is, again, critically important, because if you try to do it going forward, you can't see the future, right? You don't know what will happen tomorrow. But if you know where you need to get and then backtrack from there, I think it paints a much clearer picture in regards to just daily activities.
Yeah, totally. Very good. What other advice would you give investors who know that it'll be critically important to have a property management partner as a part of how they can manage their assets? Like, what are some of the things that maybe investors get tripped up that they expect a property manager to do, but you're like, technically, that's your responsibility?
Yeah. Again, I think it's just communication up front in having questions ready to ask a property manager in regards to, any type of property management agreement. Make sure you're just not, I looked them up online. They look legit. And then just signing a property management agreement. You really have to make sure you know what's on paper, because however just wholehearted somebody may be, it can always get to a point where if both of you are growing, it can get to a point where then lines have to be drawn to say, actually, like you said, actually, that's not my responsibility. You never want to get there, but I think it's critically important knowing early on what property management is actually going to be doing. And then every package that they have, if they do multiple packages, understanding what is incorporated in each one of those packages. Typically property managers for the smaller packages, it's just navigating your booking, sending the cleaners, and just talking with the guests while you're there. And they're not scheduling third-party vendors to go and fix problems. They're not going to fix the problems. So really making sure that if you're trying to just go the cheap route, you really understand what that cheap route entails.
Yeah, totally. And it's the advent of like, you get what you pay for. So
Yep.
yeah, you want to make sure that you know what you're paying for. There's also quite a bit of confusion, and maybe if we can educate the audience a little around two things. One is the licensing requirement in Arizona in order to do any kind of property management.
Yep.
And so folks need to be super aware of that. And they may not be, right? I've seen people who do property management and I'm like, I think you're breaking the rules. And then the other is licensing around your assets, your actual properties. Could you maybe educate the audience a little bit around those two things?
Yeah. So for instance, short-term rentals, they've started to crack down a lot. I think, again, there is the pros and cons to different styles. But what comes to short-term rental is ensuring that you have TPT licenses, that you have, approval from the city, your county, making sure that you have the STR license with your city, right? So there's a lot of steps that I think have scared people out of it. The deeper you go into real estate in terms of length of stay, I think the easier it gets on paper to ensuring that you're licensed. I would highly encourage you, if you are an investor and this is not property management side, this is more just licensing your asset. Make sure you're doing it the right way, even the property management stuff, but make sure that you have the STR license and you're not just trying to fly behind the curtain, because they will backdate you and they will figure out how much you owe and they will get their money. So I just want to save a headache for a lot of people. It may not be a fun process. I'm a property manager that sits down with individuals and walks them through the process and will even teach you how to complete the process. So finding somebody that can help you with it if it seems a little bit too much, but just doing it the right way. And then same thing for property management. Short-term rental, every state is very different. That's critical to understand. So understanding what state you want to operate in and how they view transient guests or midterm guests or long-term guests. Some states see any guest as a guest and it doesn't matter, and you need to be licensed. Some states like Arizona, you don't necessarily need to be licensed if you are just managing coordinating. You're not brokering money, or, typically the ADRE will just look at, is this house designated to be short-term? Okay, you do not need to be a licensed individual because of the nature of this property, right? You have a transaction privilege tax, so it's a TPT tax that is a transient tax. So this house is designated, even if there are stays over 7 nights, it's designated to be a short-term. I've, spoken with some of the biggest attorneys and lawyers in the state that have approved, hey, this is how it's looked at. As soon as you get to midterm or co-living, that is something where you're dealing with leases, you're dealing with brokering money, you're dealing with a lot of different parts of the ball game. And in Arizona, you are required to be licensed. State of Arizona, I have a very low risk tolerance. So, when it comes to making sure things are done the right way, I would very much rather edge on caution than on, kind of, like I said earlier, shooting from the hip. But they claim it's a class 5 felony or 6 felony if you operate in real estate in a management fashion without being licensed. So
Wow.
Do they actually drop the hammer? You probably will just get a smack on the hand and be told, cease and desist your operations. But again, I'm not a one to risk it and kind of push those limits and see how serious they'll be. So if you are brokering anything, dealing with anything, there are few and far ways between to be able to do it without a license, but you can't be paid on percentages of rent. You can't be paid on like a commission style, how many leases you bring in. It would have to be like flat fee coordination, and I would have to be W-2'd by you to be an employee that is just kind of your admin, right? Or what you could consider a VA. And so it's very hard to then sit in front of anybody who's going to ask you questions and prove your case, because they will always edge on the side that you need a license.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And it's so important. What I was made to understand too, when, cause I am a licensed agent in the state of Arizona. And, when I was working with another team, that was doing property management, like I ended up learning a lot of what they weren't doing right. And they were not doing things right, out of malice or anything like that. It was more that there's so many rules and requirements when you're doing property management. And I also realized that like you have to have a, a a broker who is willing to go through this with you, and a lot of them are not willing. Do you want to talk a little bit of why brokers don't want property management in their business?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just recently in the past, since we partnered, Ingrid, really taken on getting out of just short term and getting into midterm. And as soon as I found out I needed the license in Arizona, it's 96 hours. So 90 hours of kind of studying, you finish that, you take that test, and then there's 6 hours of contract writing. And then you take a much simpler test for that. But you learn so much, and property management right now is unfortunately one of the hottest markets for suing. Right. And so owners want to sue property managers, and tenants want to sue owners, and everybody is just very sue happy in the property management game. And even if it's not you as a property manager being sued, it's crossfire. It could be tenant to owner. And so, but then you're a part of the game, right? Because you're on contract and you have to be in that process, which then puts the broker at risk. So it's really ensuring that you have a property manager that's doing the right thing, not just again, because of the numbers and because they're doing the right stuff and they're doing the right tasks, but they're also protecting you from, very large potential lawsuits that can come from the real estate game. So a lot of brokers right now just are shying away from that. They either are not established and don't want to try it out. Because typically whenever any industry or market has a bunch of lava in it, you don't really go tiptoeing into that industry. You kind of wait for it to cool down a little bit. So when I got licensed, but I was inactive, I probably talked to 2 teams that took me all the way to the finish line and then finally backed out. I talked to probably 4 to 6 teams that were just hard no. And then I finally found a team who was already established, already has about 20 to 30 agents who are focused solely on property management. So they've been doing it for a while and they're confident in their methods, I would say, and their steps to ensuring you're doing everything right. So anything that I market has to go through approvals. Anything that I write has to go through approvals. So there's even simple verbiage of, if you say you're too close to a community college, you could be breaking laws because that could be seen as you're trying to bring in students and students only. So it's very critical to make sure you're careful with your words and that you have a property manager who knows what they're doing, but also has a broker who's overseeing that to ensure that, again, the most important asset in this is Ingryd or the owner. So making sure that we are doing everything we can to protect you as well as everyone else's liability in any situation.
That's a great point, because a lot of people, I feel, don't even realize they're accidentally breaking fair housing rules.
Yep,
Like,
absolutely.
so kind of like what you just mentioned there, where it's like they had no idea. Like, hey, you can't be outwardly saying, hey, great for students to come on by, because you can't there's so many fair housing rules. There's
Yes.
so many of them that I'm just like, I couldn't speak to all the nuance. I mean, there's some that are blatantly obvious, right?
Yeah.
But some are not. Like even using the term kids or your family in like do you know that a family can be a one person family? So if you're talking about more than one person as a family, you could be breaking fair housing rules.
Yep. And you got to be, again, it's just making sure that somebody can move fast, right? But also is taking care of that legal side. So, a lot of owners look at a property manager and say, why is this not listed? Well, hear me out here. For the last 4 days, I've been going through with my broker, ensuring that all of this information is right, but we are taking action steps. So again, that's another communication fabric that's important, which is act quick, but also act legally, right? So you don't want to go too quick to where you then are potentially breaking laws. Because kind of my go-to saying is you never want to be the example court case. You never want to be the new court case that's establishing a new foundation and around a new topic, which co-living is very new. And you don't want to be the owner and property manager that are being made an example of in the state of Arizona because they have to set some sort of boundary with it. So edging on caution, edging on legality, being very generic, and just, if you think you're being generic, go into ChatGPT and tell it, make this 10 times more generic. Right. And
that is a way that you're using AI.
Yeah, exactly. Operationally.
Actually, that's such a great way about AI, because it's like AI can be, again, it's not a hard and fast way, but AI can help you avoid those unintentional marketing terms and marketing content that really isn't aligned with fair housing rules, as an example.
Yeah, and it's a good way to keep a timestamp and paper trail, just because, when you are searching things, and then again, no one ever wants to do it, but if you ever do find yourself in court, there are ways for you to go and show that research. It's harder to show a conversation you had with your broker, but it is easier to show, again, not saying that your ChatGPT logs are going to save you in court, but it's just something you can bring that showcases, no, I wasn't neglecting this topic. Look, I searched here on ChatGPT. I printed this out. This was 3 months ago. Like, I was doing research on this topic. So you can see I was not neglecting, doing X, Y, or Z. I was actually trying to learn more. And this is one of the 100 things I was doing. So, it is, again, just another way to make sure that you're getting different style brain on it, but just extra eyes and extra paper trails. And, in real estate, it never hurts you to have an additional folder of things to show, in the case of anything going wrong.
Yeah, totally. Well, wonderful. Well, Tyler, thank you so much for providing so much of your expertise. Some of the things I'm taking away, it's like, guys, and I love how Alex Hormozy says is like, you need to go do the hard thing that you've been avoiding to kind of help you long-term, which is kind of the message I got from you, which is like, hey, go get yourself organized. It's only going to help you in the long run to get organized so that you're not dealing with the same problem over and over again. And honestly, it's how you'll help your property managers too. So cool.
Very much so.
If folks need your property management services and expertise, where would they go to find you?
Yeah. So our website is kingdomcribs.com. So that's KINGDOM, Cribs with a K. So it's KRIBS.com. You can find me on Instagram at I am Tyler Burke. And then our Instagram for our business is at Kingdom Cribs. So the same spelling as the website, but just at Kingdom Cribs. Any of those, info at kingdomcribs.com is the email. So many different ways to get a hold of me. Like I said, speed is important. So if I don't respond to you quickly, then obviously there's a problem there, and that's something that's telling you something. So expect a quick response. I'm here to help. I always love to just help with underwriting, help with tips and tricks. I'm not a guy yet that's going to tell you, you owe me $1,000 for an hour of my time. no, I want to build partnerships. I want to build friendships, and I want to do this the right way. So
Yeah.
I definitely want to be an asset to, not only just ongoing with you, Ingrid, but anybody else in your community that needs some help.
Real quick, 2026. So you got 80-ish stores that you're overseeing. What does end of 2026 look like for you then?
I easily want to double. So 2026 is a year of at minimum doubling the door count. Again, that can be across many different avenues and styles, but with co-living becoming so hot and us getting eyes on us, I could foresee, easily 100 doors this year being added to the portfolio. So in my eyes, minimum double.
Awesome. Very good. Well, thank you so much, Tyler. I am praying that you will get to that goal by the end of the year. So amazing. I love how you guys have also incorporated your faith into your business. I've said this before on this podcast, like getting into entrepreneurship really reinforced, not reinforced, it actually brought me to God and really believing in something bigger than myself, because there's a lot of times where things will test you. And I feel like my faith has really helped me get through some stuff. So
yeah. It's a big aspect of the kingdom and Kingdom Cribs. And then I have a podcast as well, which we'll have to do one on my side of the fence here. And we call it Build the Kingdom. So I firmly believe the kingdom is already built, but we get to just partake in, doing everything we can to just follow suit and be led by the greatest example that has ever come. So part of that is just treating people well in business and doing business the right way. And when you do that, people can see, your faith kind of shown just by how you operate with people in business. So
amen. Very good. I love it. Thank you so much, Tyler. I appreciate everything you've done. I've been super happy with your transparency, literally your partnership in taking over these short-term rentals I've had. So I look forward to an amazing 2026 with you. And I hope, again, you get that goal at the end of the year.
awesome.
And guys, thank you so much for being here on the Explain It podcast. We come to you every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Arizona time. Super excited. Next week, we will have Laura Burbrower back on the podcast, and we're going to talk a little bit of wellness, a little bit of land. So, but this week, thank you so much, Tyler, for being on here and telling the folks what they need to know about partnering with the right property manager. So thank you guys, and we'll see you next week.